First of all, thank you to those of you who filled out the survey and gave ideas for this video series on big questions. If you haven't done that yet and you'd like to give suggestions of big questions I can cover in these short video talks, you can still do that by clicking the link in the text on this post. So obviously I'm in my backyard. I have a friend named Joel who loves to sit in his backyard in the morning and just observe the birds and listen to the birds. In my backyard, I hear mostly cicadas and airplanes that go overhead to the Naval Air Station on occasion. But nature is kind of what this big question post is about. The question is, can you believe in evolution and in God at the same time? To get into this, I'd like to tell you a short story. It's a story of a prize-winning poet who constructed very tight verses with perfect rhyme schemes and used alliteration like no other poet ever had. And he always wrote about nature, about trees and plants, creatures. And one of his biggest fans is a guy named Ian, who had gone to college, got his degree in literature, a master's of fine arts and poetry, and followed this famous poet. Finally went to one of his book signings and got to meet his idol. And Ian walks up to the poet and says, I just want you to know, ever since I was a kid, I've read your poetry and I love your tight rhyme scheme, and your alliteration is off the charts. And the way you describe nature, you know, the way the leaves react to the wind, and the way that the ground and the creatures scatter when the big windstorms come. I love that description. And the preeminent poet looks at Ian and says, is that what you get from my poetry? Rhyme scheme, alliteration, descriptions of leaves and creatures? Ian says, yeah, isn't that what the poems are about? And the poet says, well, really, we artists don't usually tell you what our poems are about, but I can tell that, Ian, that you're really into my poetry and you want to be a poet yourself. So I'll just tell you, I wrote all those poems so that you would feel the wind. I use that story because I think that sometimes we approach certain texts the way Ian approached the poet. We're looking at one particular or two particular, three particular things in the text that maybe the writers weren't all that concerned with conveying. When it comes to creation and evolution, many times we go to Genesis 1, 2, 3. We look at, by the way, two different creation accounts there, and we say, yes, it describes exactly how creation happened in 6 days, and God did this and this and this, and God spoke and did this and this. And I wonder if we actually could sit down with the writers of those first chapters of Genesis. I wonder if they would say to us, you are picking up all this description of how. We weren't concerned with how. We wanted you to read it and know what God is like. If we approach the text that way, then yes, we could believe in evolution and God at the same time. Evolution, the theory of evolution, comes to us, of course, from Charles Darwin's seminal work, Origin of Species. And in that work, Darwin is really not concerned with the nature of God. God is concerned with the nature of nature, and he observes what he observes in nature and asks the question, how did this happen? How? How did it come to be? And through much research, he comes up with the theory of evolution. Now, many times we might look with disdain at science because there are so many theories, so it can't really be true because it's a theory of evolution, theory of relativity, and on and on and on. But in scientific terms, a theory just means something that is true because it has not been disproven, and we can't yet disprove it. We might also think of God in that light, that God cannot be disproven. And we might spend our time in better places than trying to prove or disprove God. It's called faith for a reason. Now, I will say that Darwin, in his later work called The Descent of Man, takes a much more pessimistic view towards the divine. But the actual theory of evolution, which science shows us is real, doesn't change anything about faith, doesn't make us have less faith. Because faith is about who creates. Evolution is about how it was created. That's why I can hold in perfect tension a faith in a creative God, this Yahweh of Hebrew Scripture, or the God who Jesus calls Father. I can have faith in that God and still accept evolution as the very creative process through which that Creator created. Maybe it would be a good practice for us to, when we look at the poetry of our lives, we not get too honed in on the descriptions of things, and instead we feel the wind